Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I am super excited to be joined tonight by Lisa, Gina and Hannah from the Patient-Led Research Collaborative. It's a bit of a mouthful. This is going to be absolutely wild. So a very warm welcome to the podcast, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Going to be well fun. So maybe just to start with, would you mind just each giving a sort of very brief introduction to who you are, if you don't mind?
Sure. I'll start us off. So I'm Lisa McCorkell. I'm one of the co-founders and co-leads of Patient-Led Research Collaborative. On the call today with us is Gina and Hannah, who will introduce themselves, and then one of our other co-leads, Hannah Way, couldn't make it today. So background on me is that my professional background is in public policy, and we all got sick in March of 2020 and started Patient-Led Research Collaborative in April of 2020. So we can maybe talk a little bit more about that later, but I'm based in Oakland, California, and very happy to be here.
I can go next. I am Gina Assaf, and I am based in Washington, D.C. I'm also a co-founder and a co-lead. Got sick. We all got sick around the same time. My background is in technology research, leveraging, participatory and human-centered design methods, and also, researching and designing technology. Also, now, kind of been very heavily involved in research of long COVID. And I am maybe 80%, 90%. It depends. And sometimes it's 70% better, back to where I used to be pre-COVID, but I still take a lot of medications to manage my symptoms. And so I'm still dealing with a lot of, just long COVID stuff.
And I'm Hannah Davis. I'm another one of the co-founders and co-leads of PLRC. Before I got sick, I was working in machine learning, doing a lot of projects around generative models for art and music, and also pedagogical tools for identifying bias in machine learning datasets. Also got sick in the first wave, also have a pretty bad kind of cognitive and, got the clotting markers and ME/CFS and dysautonomia and still not better.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's so amazing to have you all on the call together as well. This is really lovely. You mentioned that Patient-Led Research Collaborative kicked off, you said April 2020, I think. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and how that all started and what brought you together as well, from all your sort of different backgrounds, but sort of complementary skills almost, if that's the right word.
We all found each other in Politic, which was a support group for long COVID. We saw an op-ed by Fiona Lowenstein talking about recoveries. And I think I can speak for maybe all of us. We were all felt so alone after we saw that and automatically joined the support group. And, we saw the opportunity of folks talking about their illness and the length of the illness and the symptoms. And it definitely was new information that we had not seen outside of what we were experiencing. So, a few of us decided to kind of do a research spin on, research ourselves, given that we were all together, and put a survey out. And, we put the survey out, and that was basically how people kind of started, other folks, different people started wanting to contribute and be like, here, this is an opportunity for us to like put the data out there. And that's how we all found each other, is the need to like lend our skills and do the work and put the information out there. And we continued ever since then. And people have come and gone, from the group, but there's a core set of people, especially the leads, that kind of formulated at the beginning. And some of the leads left and haven't been as involved. And some of the people, a lot of people left the group. But we're currently like a group of how many now?
50.
50. Yeah, and the leads are 4 of us, with more people potentially joining the leads as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that I've noticed myself and from speaking to lots of other people is this sort of sense of coming together to do something, whether it's, people have come together to do advocacy work and people have come together to do different sorts of research and all sorts of other things. And I think, long COVID, and I think this probably goes for all sorts of other chronic conditions as well, is such a like isolating experience, and it's pretty horrible, it's pretty scary. But through this experience we have been able to kind of make connections that maybe we wouldn't have done otherwise. We were just saying before we started recording that like I would never have met you guys if it wasn't for this. But yeah, I just think what's so cool is that this has brought you guys together sort of out of necessity, but like that you have just really taken it and run with it in such a cool way.
Yeah, I think that's one of the like most beautiful things I'd say out of PLRC, just from my own like personal perspective, is the relationships I've formed through it. I mean, Gina and Hannah are some of my best friends, and like I had no idea who they were 3.5 years ago. Yeah, it also is, I think, speaks to our organization's values as well. Like we're all sick people, whether it's with long COVID or an associated condition like ME/CFS or POTS. And so we all inherently have this understanding of what each other's going through on a day-to-day basis, even if our symptoms are different, just like knowing that we're all dealing with some type of illness. And I don't know, I think it just really helps bring us closer together and have a deeper understanding of each other. And so it's both this like really great workplace, but also kind of a support group in and of itself. And just, bringing together people who have similar experiences that, yeah, I would have never met otherwise. And I think it's really great, like how different our backgrounds are, that, we come together to make this really powerful team because of those multidisciplinary backgrounds. But, in my little policy world, like I probably wouldn't have interacted with Hannah's AI and music background. And it's just so cool that I get to, learn from everyone else and their backgrounds, and we get to create research that's just, I think, really just stronger because of all of our different backgrounds.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think that we've been lucky in that regard, just because it made the process of like becoming disabled a lot easier for us to just automatically have that sense of acceptance, and acceptance in a situation where we were working. We were like really contributing to the community. And yeah, for me, I think like I had really, really, and still do, had really bad brain stuff, but did really early on. And I just remember like them all constantly telling me like, oh, it was fine. And it was still helpful. And I think our values are kind of health first, and that has remained true. And a lot of the kind of the policies we've put into place, like intentional redundancy and always taking time off or skipping meetings if you can't go, and those kind of things have really contributed to our success and longevity as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful thing as well. And there's something else that I've noticed in certain people, certain circumstances, where somebody who, for example, was a doctor and then they got ill, and suddenly any knowledge or skills that they had previously is suddenly, just completely, swept under the carpet by other people. So rather than seeing them as a patient who is also a doctor and has some knowledge of whatever their doctoring is in, it's really allowing that person to be, well, actually, you can be both. You can be both working or participating in the sort of, well, I'm a patient, but actually because I'm a patient, that actually makes me a better whatever else I am, because I have a deeper understanding of what these people are actually going through because you've been there. I think that probably works here as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd love to talk maybe a bit more. I mean, you mentioned that the whole organization kind of kicked off with the survey, and I get the impression that that was kind of like a launch pad for sort of all sorts of other things. So maybe it would be cool to talk about kind of like the evolution of it. Where did it kind of go from there?
I mean, we always say that we did the first survey to get answers for ourselves. When we joined Body Politic in April 2020, there were already just like thousands of people with the, kind of exact same symptoms: the fatigue, the brain fog, the post-exertional malaise, the cardiovascular stuff. And at the time, it would really, like, the narrative was 2 weeks, respiratory focused, most people are going to be fine. So we were really trying to get answers for ourselves, but as it became more and more clear that this phenomenon was happening, worldwide, having that data really early on helped communicate the narrative away from just anecdotes and more in a data-focused way. And I really, truly saw that helping kind of let us talk to the WHO and the CDC and the NIH and other major organizations worldwide much earlier on than it would have otherwise. But also at the same time, it was gray literature, which means it wasn't like a formally published paper. And a lot of the organization, we had people reaching out to us constantly after Ed Young's piece, which included our survey. And a lot of sometimes what we heard back was, like, we'd like to be able to cite this. Can you do like something more formal? And we almost instantly started working on our second survey in June 2020. And it was much more detailed. It included many more symptoms. It really tried to include all the symptoms that weren't being talked about, like I mentioned earlier. And we ended up including 200 symptoms that we'd collected from the community. And also kind of a timeline of the first 7 months of the illness, which remains to date one of the most cited, like, earliest long COVID papers. And we put that out at the end of 2020. And I think from there, we ended up just not only focusing on kind of like patient prioritized research, but also I think we just really gained the trust of both the patient and the researcher community and general health community too. So we ended up, being able to do more collaborations. We were last year given $6 million, which we put $5 million of into kind of biomedical grants for researchers who can really look at like the pathophysiology of this. We recently did a review paper on long COVID, which I think is number 70 of like 24 million papers. Just was downloaded over 1 million times since January. And that, I think, just shows the kind of impact we've been able to have even on just like medical education and things like that.
So yeah, I mean, I think the funding that we got from the 6 million, that kind of speared like a bunch of projects that we had started and we put out, including the fund that Hannah talked about. We're wrapping up some of the projects that we had, started out with them, like the reinfections project, the project at LMIC. we did the hypothesis publications, and we're doing phenotyping one. So those are starting to wrap up, and so we're at the stage now. And I think one of the things we're also doing is, along with like the research, there's a big advocacy effort going on in our group and leveraging data to do advocacy. So that has been happening, I think, from the beginning. And there's been like significant events like, Lisa testifying at Congress and other big ones that we've done throughout.
Another one of our big accomplishments kind of came out of just like the experience of being a patient researcher and being like consulting on a lot of research studies. And we realized just how often, kind of what you had been talking about, a lot of times if patients are involved in research, it's a tokenizing role. It's kind of just to, say that researchers talk to a patient and they can check a box. And so we really wanted to try to establish a new baseline of what's considered acceptable patient engagement. And so alongside the Council of Medical Specialty Societies, we created scorecards that help people evaluate both, researchers, how they can evaluate whether their research involves meaningful engagement of patients. Patient groups can evaluate researchers, decide if they want to get involved in a project, kind of based off of how they're scoring on these scorecards. And that was really informed by our own experience, as well as doing focus groups and interviews with relevant stakeholders. So I think those scorecards also were a big piece of our work the last 3 years. And it's not even, it wasn't just like long COVID focused. It really is aimed at getting to all disease groups, and I think is an important piece of our kind of patient-led nature, and just like really trying to make the norm of medical research being you have to include patients, and this is what including patients means.
Yeah, I mean, like the name is literally patient-led, right? And it's not, as you say, it's not tokenistic of, well, we'll speak to a patient and we'll probably won't really listen to them, but at least we can, say that we, did our quote unquote patient engagement. It's actually it's almost flipped it, isn't it? That it's actually it's literally led by patients, but patients who also have other skills. I don't know. I wonder if I don't like the word like legitimacy, because like someone who's sick shouldn't need to have to justify themselves. But it's almost like that. I mean, you mentioned the early study that you did with the survey, and it was almost like having that data gave sort of validation, gave legitimacy to like the condition in itself, maybe even. I mean, like thinking back to my early experiences, it sounds like I got ill at basically the same time as all of you guys. And I spent months and months kind of thinking, I have no idea what this is. Like, I must be the only person, and isn't this awful? But, I'm sure if I keep pushing through, then it'll go away. But you were straight on that, like, April 2020, like, it'd been around, well, it'd been around for a lot longer before that actually, hadn't it? But like, in terms of like lockdowns and stuff, it had only really been around for about a month or so by then, right?
Yeah, I think that was the huge benefit of us all reading that op-ed by Fiona Lowenstein. It just like that changed the trajectory of all of our lives. And joining the support group, the Body Politic COVID-19 support group, was just automatically just joining that was validation of our experiences, just realizing that we're not alone. And then we started hearing from people with ME/CFS and people who have been sick for decades. And then they were like, don't push yourself, you gotta learn to pace. And that's an adjustment, learning to pace. I think everyone is still kind of trying to learn to pace even 3 years in. But yeah, it's a very isolating experience. And so being able to join something so early on was huge. And then we just realized like there's not any researchers that we know of that are focusing on this. Like no one's really paying attention. to what's going on, but we see it as a huge issue because there are thousands of people in this support group. So we need to study it, and like we just got to take it into our own hands.
Yeah, I mean, I also think because a lot of us, and I'm sure you too, weren't getting any answers from anybody that we considered like official, or like you'd go to your medical provider and physician, and they would just like, for the most part, gaslight you, and say, oh, there's nothing, you're young, you're healthy, you're fine, go home, when you're not feeling fine. And so it was super validating to find others. I mean, I got sick with folks who at the same time as me, they got better. And I was like, why am I not getting better and they're better? And so finding others, and that was like just eye-opening, empowering, comforting. And so I think putting it together in a way that we can look at it even more objectively, with like a data lens, I think was something that felt like the next step, right? Because we didn't know, like, I think at that point, like, it wasn't clear who else had gotten together, as like sick people finding each other. Like, were we the only group that is like finding each other, So I'm sure there were others, and probably, there were, but at that time, it just felt like a very unique experience.
We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us.
And I think Body Politic in particular set us up for success in a few ways. Like, first, it was a Slack group. And so it wasn't these Facebook groups, which like the threads were overwhelming and they kept like repeating themselves. Like we found our group specifically in a channel called Data Nerds. And so it self-selected, right, for people whose coping strategy was learning as much as possible. And that's definitely true of most people in PLRC, like action and really trying to get information. And then the other thing they did that was just so good and very different from most of the other groups was they were from the beginning focused on disability justice. So focusing on people with ME and HIV/AIDS who had come before us, so much of the advocacy that's been done in those spaces is like entirely relevant for our situation too, especially a lot of what we learned from kind of the minimization strategies of viral onset illnesses it comes from basically the same playbook, right? So we had kind of expectations of what we would start seeing from people who were going to minimize us. We could use data to counteract that. So like one of the papers we put out, or one of those narratives is like, oh, the support groups are fueling this, health anxiety in patients. And actually these patients just have bad coping strategies. So we were actually able to show through data that people who join support groups don't have health anxiety or depression or mental health outcomes any different than those who don't. And that long COVID patients actually have good coping strategies. And that when you compare long COVID patients' coping strategies to people without long COVID, there are some adaptive strategies that are even higher in long COVID patients. So now, like when people say that, like we have like a paper to put out against it. And also just understanding, I think the values of disability justice have really shaped the way that we are trying to be as an organization and interdependent with each other and with other communities that have a lot more knowledge than we do.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of seems logical when you think about it that people with long COVID or chronic illness in general, that they have good coping strategies, because that's kind of born out of like desperation, right?
Yeah, totally.
It's almost like that. I'm sure there's a quote that's escaping my brain, but about not knowing what you can do until you're put in a position where you have to. And I think in some ways that's kind of relevant here, because you don't know how bad things can be. And I guess this comes into the whole gaslighting, or certainly lack of understanding, is that people who haven't experienced something like this cannot understand. Some of them will be empathetic, some of them will be helpful, some of them will at least want to be helpful, but nobody, I don't think, can truly understand, having not had some personal experience of it. And I think that's why having the patient involvement in research, in whatever, is so important. And coming at this from a non-medic, non-research background, it's always seemed to me that, like, it should be a no-brainer that you have patients involved in research in a meaningful way. And it's been really interesting kind of learning more about this as I've spoken to more people, and how it's like, oh well, patients involved in research, that's actually a new thing, and we're not really sure how we think about it, and it doesn't seem like a good idea, because patients, what do they know? And it's like, patients know quite a lot, actually, as it turns out, and they're invested in a way that possibly non-patients wouldn't be.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I when I was at one of the conferences this past couple of weeks, somebody from the rare disease community came up to me and was like, this patient-led research thing, I mean, that's the only thing that happens in our communities, because there are illnesses that are, underfunded, misunderstood, and they've been ignored for so long, and so they've had to do this patient-led research, and they've been doing it pretty well. It's just that they're just underfunded and and not given attention. They're the only ones that are being able to advance their knowledge in their illness, and so they've actually been doing it pretty well. It's just that they haven't been getting the attention and the funding. Long COVID, I think, it's kind of in a unique situation, is where we started out, I would say, as like, not many people have it, and now it's not, I wouldn't call it a rare illness, right? Long COVID. And so we started out as this new illness, and so we did kind of put the attention out there on this illness, and did this patient-led research because of the need of it. But then, like, the attention came on it because it was a realization, hey, this is hitting more than just these few pockets of people, right? Yeah, and in a way, it highlighted how great patient-led research can be, because an illness that is hard to understand, and it's episodic a little bit. Some of the illness is episodic, and it's not, doesn't follow like your linear, like an illness that is easily kind of identified, or the basic tests can show you what's wrong. We're not the first to do it, right? The patient-led and that. But I think, because the unique thing with the long COVID community and what we did with PLRC is we kind of led with the patient-led. And then, because it's not a rare illness, it did get some attention outside of, and became a little bit more mainstream, I would say,
Yeah, I think, like Gina said, like, it has been done many, many times before. I think it's just not as well accepted within the medical community. And, even in like medical schools, it's not like there are courses on how to engage patients in your research, and providers aren't even taught a lot about like what our conditions are. But I think we need to have that kind of paradigm shift, and there's evidence for it. Like, we have examples of it, especially in HIV/AIDS in the 90s and 2000s. Like, that is really where a lot of patient engagement and research happened, and that was because the community demanded a seat at the table and demanded a meaningful seat. But there's, countless other examples of patients themselves doing research, even like not in partnership with other researchers, finding some huge advancement in their disease. I think it's frustrating that it's taken a while for the medical community and biomedical research to really see that as a necessary aspect of their research, and not as like one-off kind of like miracles that a patient could do something, because it really is like, we're finding solutions so much faster when patients are involved. And we see this in other areas. So like, I think coming from the policy world, it wasn't as like it felt like a natural thing for patients to be involved in this type of thing because there's been more of a movement and more acceptance in the policy world of people who are closest to the pain should be closest to the power. That's a quote from Ayanna Pressley. Like there's more acceptance of the people who are most impacted by policies, who are, most marginalized. They should be the ones that are figuring out policy solutions. And so it felt like natural for me to do this and was just like, why is the biomedical community kind of like so resistant to this idea? We're not saying that we can do everything. Like I'm not in the lab doing basic science. We need basic scientists, but we can help guide based off of the experience. Like designing a study that maybe assumes that a condition is going to be the same no matter what time of day, no matter what time of month, if you're menstruating, is, that's kind of how someone who's not experiencing an illness and an episodic illness would maybe design a study. But having that patient input being like, actually, time of day really matters for my symptoms. Actually, my symptoms are heavily exacerbated when I'm on my period. Like those are things that really only people with lived experience can provide. And so it's just so important to have that partnership and view both types of kind of skills and both experiences as equally valuable.
And I think that's related to not only just like the symptoms, but within COVID, like the like societal obstacles that we've faced. Like one of the things we constantly talk about is that like the first waivers didn't have access to PCR tests, and that like a third of people don't make antibodies, but yet people who are not talking to patients often require PCR test or a positive antibody test when 80% of people who lose antibodies are women, and this illness primarily impacts women. And so I think there are like some COVID specific things that we've been able to help shift the narratives on as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've seen in so many research studies that I've spoken to is, oh, well, in order to participate, you need a positive COVID test. And I'm thinking, well, by saying that, you're basically excluding like what, 80% of first waivers? And they're the people that have the longest amount of data to give, which just seems like so frustrating.
Yeah, in the US, the statistic is only 3% of first waivers got documentation. And throughout the height of testing, like through September 2021, the CDC says only 25% of COVID cases have documentation due to either lack of testing or inaccurate testing. And no one, like, I would love to design like a general population-wide update information about COVID, and that would be kind of the top of the list because there's so much data out there about all these things that we're struggling with, and none of that data is getting communicated. And I think that's a lot of the kind of work we do too, is like around communications, but it's just only because of the failure of public health organizations to do that for us.
Yeah, and I guess that's, why what you guys are doing is important, that this does get communicated, but also like how frustrating is it that like people who are sick are having to do it yourselves?
Yeah, and I think that's like a two-way. That's like it's empowering in a way, to like do things because you feel like it needs to happen. But yeah, it's also frustrating because you're like, if I don't do it, is nobody gonna do it? And like, what's gonna happen to us? And it's kind of scary, it feels and it makes you realize how messed up our healthcare system and just the way research is done or investigated. It makes you wonder, what else is being, not taken care of, and how many other people are like being ignored with their illnesses and situations and that sort of thing. But yeah, it is. I feel like it's both, where you're like empowered, but then you're also Yeah, it's like feeling both feelings at the same time.
I sometimes joke that the worst part of realizing that we can have an impact on the world is the fact that we can have an impact on the world. And so it just feels like everything, we can affect everything. So we should, but then it's just like this tremendous burden. Um, and, I don't think any of us are good at saying like, oh no, we're not going to do this thing because we know it will tangibly help people and, continues to and does.
That's
And also now that it's politicized, like to me, I feel like it's so much harder like this year than it was in the first year because there's just so much less support, like social support, interpersonal support.
Yeah, and it's mind-boggling because there's more people who have it, and so there's less attention, and it feels like less worry about it and less like attention on it. But then that the numbers are not low, and then there's also like people don't even know what they're going through is potentially long COVID or related to COVID because of the messaging with us, because it happened in such an isolated manner. We were able to like tie it directly to it, whereas so many other people are being diagnosed with POTS or with unknown illnesses, and it's unclear why. And so that is also another thing that I feel like we're trying to grapple with as an organization. How do we tackle those things? It's really tricky.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting how the sort of, I guess the narrative has changed, isn't it? And it does seem very much now how everybody just wants to pretend that the last 3.5 years hasn't happened. And, I can understand that, it's been traumatic for everybody on different levels and in different ways. But, it did happen. And if we don't learn from history, then that seems really unwise. And it seems like this really sort of strange paradox kind of going on at the moment where you've got more and more people falling unwell and, oh yeah, I had this really awful cold. And actually, 3 months later, I'm still not feeling that good. And you're like, yeah, but you can't say it because nobody wants to talk about it anymore.
Yeah, that has been like really difficult to witness, especially when you know that there are things you can do to maybe minimize your chances of getting long COVID, like the rest, like not being able to tell people like, oh, just take it easy for the next 2 months. Yeah, it's just terrible to watch the people around us like get this and then understand and then realize it and then ask for help, etc. But
Yeah, and it's been helpful to have folks who have joined PLRC who are kind of those folks as well, that have gone through that, where they were like, oh yeah, it was in the back of our head, but then I realized I saw you all talk about it, but didn't, think it would happen to me or whatever. And so just having those perspectives as well kind of is helpful for us to understand, how this is going to be like a continued, but maybe changing, way of looking at how to, I don't know, talk about it in the public or communicate and things like that.
We'll be right back. Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much.
and I think if we had had either vaccination or prior infection had like been meaningful protection, the conversation would be different, the outlook would be different. But I think especially this year, or at least like from what I see, the majority of people who get long COVID now were fully vaccinated, did have usually one or even two prior infections, then got it on the third time or fourth time or whatever. And because that's happening, this is a problem that is only going to increase, and we need public awareness about that, and we need like clinical trials and treatments, like curative treatments, as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think as well, I mean, obviously the conversation here is very much around COVID and long COVID, but I think, we've all kind of, acknowledged tonight that this post-viral conditions in general are not a new thing, and they've been going on for a long time. And this whole experience for me has been very eye-opening in a lot of ways, to something that I knew about it, but I actually really didn't know about it, as it turns out, or certainly not on any meaningful level. And you kind of thinking like to the future, yes, we're talking about MECFS from the past, from any number of different viruses, and we're now talking about long COVID as a result of a COVID infection. But going forward, things like EBV still around, mono still around, is still going to be causing its own cases of post-viral something, and anything else that happens in the future. And it seems to me like a real opportunity. It's terrible that these things have been ignored for so long, but now we've got so many people with long COVID kind of adding their voices to the pile, kind of thing. It seems like an opportunity to kind of really try and do something, about this kind of collection of illnesses that has sort of been swept under the carpet for so long.
Yeah, and I think that's something that bothers us all a lot because I think it's a little different in the UK, but in the US, there's so much research on these conditions like myalgic encephalomyelitis. It's a similar kind of thing where that research has just not been communicated, but so many of the patterns are the same. Like for a while, one of the major theories was clotting, that ME/CFS was clotting, after this pair of doctors realized that heparin being administered to women who had had some kind of, I can't remember, so a condition in pregnancy, like improved their ME/CFS symptoms by a lot. And there's T cell exhaustion, and there's the cerebral blood flow and hypometabolism and reactivated viruses. And there's just so much if we were starting from there and then building on it and seeing what COVID does specifically, et cetera, rather than starting with, oh, COVID's a respiratory virus, which is what we saw a lot, people just assuming a respiratory hypothesis when it's clearly a multi-systemic disease. I think we would be a lot further along. And the researchers who do that, have much better work. They put out much better work, and you can see they're just much closer to putting out, something that looks closer to a cure or a unifying theory.
Yeah, and I think like moving forward, there's a lot of efforts within patient advocacy groups to bring awareness to all infection-associated chronic conditions together. And that benefits us in so many ways. It benefits us from a provider education perspective. If providers are aware that basically any pathogen can cause long-term effects, that's what we see with chronic Lyme, that's what we see with ME/CFS, with POTS, long COVID, then they'll be able to treat patients better. But that type of education just has never really occurred at a meaningful level. And most of these patients have just been dismissed. It also helps us from a research perspective, being able to come to answers faster if we look at what Hannah was saying, like looking at these conditions, seeing the similarities, doing cross illness research, so doing, basically the same study, but just different cohorts based off of what the inciting infection was. That's going to get us to answers so much faster and get us to treatments faster. So I think, looking at all of these conditions from that perspective and joining forces, I think is really going to help improve our understanding and just be able to get more support and resources to the patients that have these conditions, and hopefully bring more, prevention, and be able to tackle the issue earlier on in people's illnesses. So yeah, it's such a huge thing. If we had had that earlier, we'd be in a much different place now. But at least now we need to use this opportunity to push that framing forward.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking just as you were speaking there, just on the most basic of levels of education, this idea that if you're ill, oh, well, you still need to go to work, you still need to do this, you still need to do all of these things. Oh, it's just a cold, oh, it's just a, it's just a whatever. And you're thinking, well, actually, if you're ill, it's not just an anything, even if it is quote unquote just a cold, actually you should still be able to allow yourself to have a day off because you're feeling like crap. Like that should just be a thing that people do, and yet it's not, and it never was for me. I would always just keep on going because that was what was expected of you. Well, that's certainly what I thought anyway. And it's amazing how your perspective on that can change, I think, certainly for me. I guess it would be cool if you're able to share what is going forward for you guys. Have you got new exciting projects in the in the pipeline that you're able to talk about a little bit?
And we're at the phase where, we're wrapping up a lot of the projects that we had started with that big amount of funding. And so, I think we'll have some, new papers or new things to share in the coming few months. We actually just got one of our publications on return to work, which I'm really excited about. That one I think is going to be really interesting. So I think we'll have a lot more papers and content coming out that's going to keep us busy for the next few months and wrapping up all the internal projects that we're having or were funded. And in terms of what's next, I mean, I think we're continuing to try to do the work and push forward on clinical trials and anything else that will benefit the long COVID community, whether it's treatments, whether it's biomarkers, whether it's medications that are going to help with our symptoms, but being prescribed regularly by medical providers.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I'm excited. This is technically already stuff we already did, was funding our 10 studies through our patient-led research fund, but over the next year we'll start seeing results from those, and so I'm really excited to see that, and also excited to see we'll put out results from our reinfection survey, so that'll be coming up soon. We also, I mean, I just mentioned kind of that patient advocacy groups are coming together. But so we're trying to help push forward a coalition of groups that are under the infection associated chronic condition umbrella. And so I'm really excited for that too, because I do think that that's really needed. So yeah, but ultimately, we're hoping to both scale as an organization, try to do more, and also stay sustainable. And so we're working on that now.
Yeah, I would echo mostly what's already been said, but we've seen a couple of the outputs of our research fund, including amyloid deposits in skeletal muscle tissue during PEM, and a new clinical trial looking at viral persistence. And I think one of the things we're trying to do now, or we're really focusing on clinical trials in the next year, and trying to raise money to do the research fund again with a focus on kind of trying to get a couple meaningful biomedical clinical trials up and running. We really just see the need for that pretty urgently.
Yeah, I mean, that must be so exciting to start to see, the results of all of, you guys have put a load of work into this, and, all of the people doing the bits and pieces, they've all put all this work in, and yeah, to sort of see that start to sort of come to fruition where you're actually able to go, oh my goodness, we have something tangible, that must be so cool.
It's really exciting. I think it makes it worth it. Does it? I think so.
Yeah, must be certainly on some level, I would think.
I mean, obviously we're hoping for, all of us to get better and, to elevate the patient-led research community or patient-led research work and the other infectious associated illnesses, that happens out of this pandemic. And if some of our work kind of helped with that, that would be amazing. I'd be proud of that. I'd be happy. But, first and foremost, I hope all of us get better and, and are able to function at a pace that we're okay with, and able to thrive and sort of beyond just surviving, which it feels like sometimes that's what we're doing.
And I just want to give a shout out, I guess, to our team, because we wouldn't be here without them, and the patient community generally, because we source so many ideas and hypotheses from the patient community. So we just appreciate all of them. And I probably can't name all, 50 people on this podcast right now from our organization, but just, huge love and appreciation to our team.
Yep, I second that.
Yeah, it's a really amazing group of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for giving up. I was going to say your evening. I don't think it is evening for you guys, but whatever time of day it is for you, giving up your time and your energy to come and chat with me. It's been so much fun. And yeah, thank you for all that you're doing, all that you have done, and good luck with the future plans. Maybe you can come back and talk when you've got a load of results from all of your stuff.
That'd be awesome. Thank you so much, Jackie.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to all of my guests, and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch